This is a Brown Line train to Kimball. Chicago and Franklin is next. Doors open on the right at Chicago and Franklin. It's destiny. As a well-bodied Muslim must make pilgrimage to Mecca, so too must a white man make
With
a
an
podcast.
okay body.
Make a podcast. But the topic for today has to do with some social reformers from Chicago. Social reformers being what social justice warriors were called back at the turn of the 20th century. Like then, they were mostly socially conscious women who went out of their way to make some good in the world. Unlike uh, some SJWs today, most of them had very explicitly religious motivations. It was called the social gospel movement among the Protestants of this wing, but as we will see, this is a social movement which bridged overall ecumenical divides.
I can offer another name for these social reformers. If today we call them social justice warriors, then maybe we could call them social gospel warriors.
There you go.
Maybe.
The social gospel warriors, bringing the spiritual warfare to the heart of alleviating poverty.
Right.
Well,
Just calling them a warrior
yeah.
offers a little bit of oomph to the cause.
Yeah. Well, you do have the Salvation Army, after all.
Oh, is that does that come from this time period?
I believe it. Yeah, it comes from a roughly similar time period. It's part of the general movement, I think, about the very like outreach oriented kind of Christianity lived out.
Well, tally ho.
Indeed, and let's tally these hoes.
Right. Wow.
So yeah,
Talking about some important women, Ben.
exactly.
I don't know if we want to be saying that we're going to be tallying these hoes.
It was simply a gardening term.
Let's continue.
Yes. So to sort of center our conversation, this will come in two parts. The first part will come, they're each going to be based off of a place. So our first place is the Cabrini-Green homes. Are you familiar with Cabrini-Green?
Only through you, Ben, and the Candyman
Yes.
series.
Yeah, so Cabrini-Green, constructed in 1942 originally, have some interesting cultural staying power. We discovered in a previous conversation that so the Cabrini-Green homes were one of the, quote unquote, like projects in Chicago.
Public housing.
Yeah, public housing. One of the more famous or infamous examples. We had an interesting conversation, I remember, maybe about a year ago when we were talking about Cabrini-Green and O Block, probably the two most infamous that we're familiar with, except you didn't know what Cabrini-Green was, and I didn't know what O Block was.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And
yes, I remember this, yeah.
I think my theory was that it had to do with that, you had a lot of cultural figures come out of both places, but everyone that came out of O Block were a lot of, basically the entire drill rap scene came out of O Block.
Gotcha.
And Michelle Obama.
Right.
Versus the people that came out of Cabrini-Green were mostly jazz and blues musicians.
Gotcha.
Big in Chicago types, but not necessarily on a
makes sense
global stage that you would have heard about. But to get back to their founding, so Cabrini-Green, the projects in general, famous nowadays for sort of having predominantly, marginalized, very segregated African American populations.
Mm-hmm.
Back when they were founded, they were originally called the Francis Cabrini Homes, and they were just a bunch of like townhouses that were mostly serving recent Italian immigrants.
Gotcha.
A lot of Italian refugees, but also just general Italian immigrants settling down. They and those original townhomes those are the only parts of this project to exist to this day of the row homes.
And where geographically are we talking about?
We're talking about River North.
Really?
So like, yeah, very affluent area, all things considered, like all around it. And this was kind of like the quote, like wrong side of the tracks, as it was literally on the other side of the brown and purple line tracks.
Right.
And so this is all taking place like in the context of an otherwise, again, started out as working class, but as the rest of the community continued to gentrify, Cabrini-Green only got more segregated. And which is where a lot of those issues erupted from.
Mm-hmm.
So the Cabrini-Green row homes, those are built in the 40s. In the 60s, that's when the William Green homes were added, and that's when you started seeing more of the high rises and all of that stuff cropping up that Cabrini-Green is sort of visually known for
Gotcha.
today. Um, they were, in fact, so poorly run that the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development took custody of them from Chicago's own public housing
Oh
department
no.
in the 90s, basically up until the last of the towers was torn down in 2011. And CHA, Chicago's public housing body, has only within I think around like the last decade or so regained custody of the like housing development in
Right.
the city after they just so perfectly botched Cabrini
A
Green.
classic Chicago tale.
Mhm.
A tale as old as time, mismanaged public office.
Yep, couldn't sound more Chicago than that. But yeah, like so these houses were like this housing development is, famous for all sorts of things. Um they have a lot of cultural staying power. So like you said, they're in the Candyman movies. There was the sitcom Good Times, which was kind of set in
Oh,
Cabrini Green. Where it's dealing with a more, like working class African American family in Chicago. Very much like a lot of cultural staying power. Even today, I saw a movie that came out just last year called We Grown Now, which is about a couple of kids growing up in Cabrini Green and their childhood. It's it's got a very, it's got a very mixed legacy because it was so poorly run for people, but it was a very important, kind of cornerstone neighborhood as
mhm.
well. So Cabrini Green, these are two different names. So William Green and Francis Cabrini,
Okay.
that different parts of them were named after.
Sure.
William Green, he was like big labor guy, so he was the longtime leader of the American Federation of Labor, the AFL, of the AFL-CIO, and Frances Cabrini was the she was actually the first ever American saint.
Excellent. And she was from Chicago?
She came to Chicago, so Chicago is her adopted home.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
We claim her.
We claim
Great.
her. Yeah, so Frances Xavier Cabrini, or Mother Cabrini, she was born Maria Francesca Cabrini in what's today Lombardy in Italy. Back then was part of the Austrian Empire. This was in July 1850.
Okay.
She, was, grew up in a sort of like, not very well-to-do family, but she was a very precocious child.
Mhm.
Her uncle was a priest, Don Luigi, and he noticed a lot of uh-huh.
Well, Don Mario. All right. I think so. Let's continue.
Of course. Funnily enough, I actually played Don Luigi in a like church-themed podcast.
Mamma mia.
Indeed, I am Madonna Luigi.
Cabrini.
Indeed. But he noticed in her a lot of tendencies towards like a more active life than was available to her in her
Mhm.
village. She would often like make paper boats and fill them up with like I think either like lilies or violets and then send them out into the river as like little missionaries to distant shores.
Excellent.
Very like I don't know, child with a good bit of wanderlust, as you
Good.
can see. Um,
Not
but
too lust for wander.
I Wander, I hardly know her. Um, but the young Cabrini would eventually go on to get an education. She would get her teaching degree and would eventually found a religious order that would operate and run a bunch of schools, like community centers, health clinics, things like that, called the Missionary Sisters of the Sacred Heart.
Did she found that in Lombardy or
Yeah,
in
so
America?
back in Italy, she initially founded this order. It's very small, but they were very like already a lot of social outreach,
Gotcha.
education, health, community, promoting a lot of these things locally into like small communities in Italy.
And we're talking like what, 1870s, 1880s now?
Yeah, so these are like 1870s, late like
Gotcha.
1877. Um, and she would then take on the religious name of Francis Xavier Cabrini.
Right.
Francesca's her middle name, and Francis Xavier is founder of the Jesuits, missionary, a lot of wanderlust.
That's a solid name.
Yeah.
That's a good Catholic name.
Right? That's like, okay, you got like saint name, Italian.
Right.
Perfect.
My mother would be so proud.
I know. Um she would then when she wrote the constitution for the religious order, because like religious orders, they need constitutions.
We the sisters.
They were approved by the Pope, and her idea was, this is the time that, there were missionaries all over the world doing a bunch of stuff. She was thinking like, oh, I could go to distant shores. I could be in the Philippines. I could be in Vietnam. And the Pope, in fact, personally said to her when he was approving her constitution, not to the east, my dear, but to the west. And she was sent to America.
A hive of scum and villainy, unlike anything the world had yet seen. Chicago, Illinois.
She was specifically sent to serve a lot of the Italian immigrants which had recently come to America's big cities.
Gotcha.
She landed first in New York, where she had her, bit of her couple of stayover years when she was coming into the country. The Archbishop of New York at the time was in fact was so mean to her that he tried to like just expel her from his city. And so the Pope wrote her an apology letter being like, I'm so sorry you got treated that way. Do you want to come back?
Oh my gosh.
And she was like, no, I'm going to stick around. I'm going to stick it out. So she did. And so eventually she would travel further west and land in Chicago. So this is where like a lot of her work took place.
Mm-hmm.
In Chicago, this was taking place in the broader context of the urban mission movement, where you had a lot of, Catholics settling down in immigrant neighborhoods, setting up and building communities with the people there.
When did she come to Chicago?
She came to Chicago in 1899,
Gotcha.
just before the turn of the century.
Yeah, but she missed the fair and the fire and all.
Yeah, fair and the fire. Yeah, fire had already happened.
1871.
Yeah, and then fair had, I think, concluded
93.
93. Yeah, so like a few years prior.
Yeah, okay.
But she's living in post World's Fair Chicago, and while she's here, she does a lot of work. She founds 2 hospitals, and each of which operated for decades. There was Columbus Hospital in Lincoln Park, which is now her shrine, and then there was also the Columbus Hospital Extension that's in Little Italy, so like West Side Taylor Street.
Gotcha.
We will be returning to Little Italy later.
I'm hungry, so
I know we can go to Pompeii. It's great. So she would personally go on to found with her missionary sisters about 67 charitable institutions.
Wow.
All throughout the U.S. And just there are 2 congregations of these sisters active within our immediate vicinity, one in Chicago, one in Des Plaines.
Cool.
And so she continued this work for a while, serving predominantly Italian immigrants, but all of the urban poor and immigrants as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
She became very much beloved within the city through her work, through her outreach. And when she passed away on December 22nd of 1917, she was only 67 years old.
Yeah, that's kind of young.
Yeah, she suffered from...
Not really for 1917, but...
Right, but it's still like, oh, you've heard of people living older than that.
Yeah.
Apparently she died of a heart inflammation. So she really was a bleeding heart.
Right, yeah, literally her.
Yeah.
She cared too much.
Honestly, that's possibly it, at least the stress of all of it. But she passed away in her own hospital that she had founded. So there's a kind of... that's either morbid or poetic.
I think that's... Maybe this is the wrong takeaway.
Mm-hmm.
How good's that hospital? Her name's on the building, and they couldn't even...
I mean, remember, this was during the era when they thought that cancer could be treated by circular rooms, so...
They can't?
Andy, I hate to inform you.
God, I gotta call my architect.
Yeah. But she would She would go on to actually continue her legacy in Chicago because after she died, the when the Lincoln Park Hospital shut down, it became her shrine. And so, that is now the national shrine of Frances Cabrini. Her arm bone is in a sort of glass sarcophagus in the altar,
Never
so you can
changed.
see it.
Never changed, Catholic.
Yeah. And when she was beatified, she was the beatification mass took place in Soldier Field.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. So the whole stadium was filled up with people praying for the beatification of Mother Cabrini.
Cool.
This is some very minor details, but I found it fun because in order to be made a saint in the Catholic Church, you need 2 documented healings.
Right. Or be a martyr.
Or be a martyr.
And then you only need 1 miracle.
Exactly. The 2 that were recorded for her was that one was, there was a terminal illness that a missionary sister was suffering from contemporarily who was healed. That's all well and good, like cured from chronic illness.
Classic.
The other one was a young boy who went blind from an overdose of topical silver nitrate.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he got a 50% silver nitrate solution in his eyes. Normally, when you buy silver nitrate, it is a 1% concentration.
Sure.
And so he went blind from that.
Yeah.
And then his vision was restored. And so now Mother Cabrini can be, she's now a saint. I think it was the blind boy that was the beatification. So that's why they were in Soldier Field.
Wow.
It was attended by like 120,000 people.
Really?
It's more than you'll find in any Bears game these days.
I mean, that's more capacity than Soldier Field has.
I know. I think there were people who were like listening to the loudspeakers out in the parking lot.
Wow.
Speaking of parking, Mother Cabrini, while she is, patroness of Chicago, patroness of city dwellers, urbanites, the urban poor, and immigrants.
Yeah.
She is also, folksily, the patroness of parking spaces.
Really?
Yes. If you've ever heard the prayer for lost things, St. Anthony,
Yeah.
St. Anthony, please come around, something is lost and cannot be found. There's another one from Mother Cabrini because, as a city-dwelling woman herself, she can sympathize with the plight of on-street parking available in Chicago street.
Right.
And so that particular rhyme goes, Mother Cabrini, please find a spot for my little machine. I have shared the good news of this prayer, and I have even had Jewish friends try it to good effect.
Good. Mother Cabrini.
Please find a spot.
Please find a spot for
my little machine. It's very cutesy. But in modern times, Mother Cabrini has also grown into something of an Italian-American cultural symbol as a whole. Like I said.
An Andrew Cuomo.
Yeah.
Tony Soprano.
Precisely. But by which I mean, so I believe it's Colorado, which has actually replaced its Columbus Day celebration with Mother Cabrini.
Nice.
Because the way that Columbus Day started, I don't know if you're familiar with the story.
Really? No.
It was founded by, it was during an era where a lot of different immigrant groups were trying to sort of insert themselves into the American narrative so that they could sort of like defend their belonging in American culture. So this is when Pulaski Day became a thing in Chicago so that the Polish people could insert themselves into American history. Columbus Day was how Italian immigrants did that.
Gotcha.
He wasn't really a cultural figure before this like big push to be like, no, we belong in America too.
Right.
We've been here since the start. And so, some places have started celebrating, Indigenous Peoples Day because Columbus was, sucked. But Colorado and like some other, I think, localities have celebrated Mother Cabrini Day, recognizing its history as basically honoring Italian-American immigrant history.
That's cool.
Yeah. And so I think that's all wonderful. And that's why the Frances Cabrini row homes made for Italian immigrants in the 40s were named after her.
Makes sense.
But she was not the only social reformer in Chicago, nor the only one with ties to Little Italy. That would be Jane Addams.
My girl.
Indeed. The second place we'll be talking about is Hull House, its founder of whom is Jane Addams, sometimes called Saint Jane, although she despised that nickname personally. Um,
She was just so mellow. It seemed I have a
yeah,
soft spot in my heart for Jane Addams.
yeah.
I talk about her on my river tours that I give. Occasionally, I'll talk about her. Weirdly enough, in the haunted tours is when I talk about her.
Oh yeah.
So I just have a soft spot
Mm,
for her and her mission.
yeah. No, she is, but no, like quite low key, despite her resume as founder of Hull House, co-founder of the ACLU, a Nobel Peace Laureate, and she is on the Gay Walk of Fame on Halsted Street in Boys Town.
Was she gay?
Yes, it is one of those little discussed but well attested facts.
Gotcha.
So I'll get to that. But yes, so she first talking about her professional, then her personal life. She sort of represented a two forms of political ideology that have kind of like fallen out of fashion these days. You had reformism and the settlement movement, settlement activism.
Okay.
Reformism basically being just the reform of cultural institutions, a lot of that coming from a very like again like social gospel sort of mindset.
Sure.
A lot of days now you see much more like more I suppose like abolitionist thinking in certain things, but she very much represents a like these institutions exist. Let's reform them and reform them in light of you know the God's love of the poor.
Sure. Okay.
The settlement movement is, I think, the more interesting one to discuss because settlement movement, unlike the urban missions of Mother Cabrini, it was largely secular women who were, of, some financial means, wanting to live with and among the communities they served.
Gotcha.
So today you have, Mackenzie Scott King, who's just Jeff Bezos's ex,
Right.
who's just like fairy godmothering every nonprofit. Every time I scroll through my reel, it's like Mackenzie Scott King donates $10 million to Doctors Without Borders, and you're like, that's cool, but it is at a distance,
right?
Whereas the settlement movement was like, I have money. I don't want to be like I don't want to have like a savior complex. I want to be part of this community.
Yeah.
Which I think is very cool because that's not a thing you see a ton these days. I mean, except when Mayor Byrne tried moving in Cabrini-Green for about 3 weeks before she moved out. She did.
Oh man.
Yeah, Jane Byrne.
She just didn't stick it.
I didn't stick it. I don't know if it was intended to always be temporary, but I don't know if it was the gunshots or the lack of a working elevator, but she moved out. But so Jane Addams did a lot in her life as we established. But I can go into a bit of like some of her inspiration because even though she was public facing secular, never proselytized with Hull House, she was herself very religious, but it was very like interior personal. So in 1898, she met with like Leo Tolstoy. I don't know if you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The author.
Yep, the author Tolstoy. Kingdom of God is within you is his work of like it's his Christian Communist Manifesto.
Sure.
Quite literally, it is like the seminal work of Christian socialism.
Right.
And so she was like, socialism, that's great for Europe. America's different, but I support what you're doing.
Right, not to mention War and Peace.
Right. I mean, yes, but like Tolstoy is famous for that, but this is what's relevant to Jane.
Right.
Yeah.
I think you gotta go. When you mention Tolstoy, you have to go, well, author of War and Peace.
Author of War and Peace.
Friend of Jane Addams. Author of War and Peace.
She was also kind of friends with Teddy Roosevelt, progressive era president.
Just knew each other then.
Just knew each other.
There's like less people, I suppose.
That's true. She was also a big fan of like the transcendentalists and the poets, like as well as writers like Lou Alcott. I say Lou Alcott because Lou, author of Little Women, in another twist you might not be familiar with, is in a also not talked about but well attested fact is probably trans.
Wow.
Yeah, Lou preferred going by masculine reference. All of his friends called him like Lou or Louie,
Oh,
all family members. And, is famous as the author of Little Women.
right.
Yeah.
Well,
Yep.
rock on.
Yeah. And so Jane, again, all the social reformers, all of the famous gay people who were not out, all knew each
Right.
other. I wonder what that says about Teddy.
Right. Or Tolstoy.
Right. Um, her partner, like her like life partner, was Mary Rosette Smith, who she co-ran Hull House with, who I believe is from Evanston.
Gotcha.
And then her kind of like her old flame was Elegate Starr,
Oh,
very like much more radical, much more Catholic. Jane was a bit too Protestant for that type of fire and fury.
right.
But Starr was much more like liberation theology
Way to
type.
go. Oh,
Oh yeah.
the saucy love life of late 19th century Chicago elites.
Exactly. Um but Jane, she was best title to describe her was probably just, quietly Christian. Um Born Presbyterian, became a Quaker. Um, she wore instead of wearing a cross, she actually wore a Chi-Rho under her shirt.
Yeah.
Um,
The older, more traditional symbol.
mhm,
That's what Constantine put on his shield.
exactly.
The Battle of Milvian Bridge in 313 AD.
Exactly. um, you're saying nothing nerdier than I am, so
Right.
there's no reason I have to mock you.
Yours at least is relevant to the topic at hand.
I suppose.
Rome. Milvian Bridge doesn't have much to do with
I mean, hey, all roads
Chicago.
lead back to Rome.
I suppose so.
But she was also death positive, which I wonder if that has anything to do with the Hull House ghost stories.
Death positive?
Yeah, that's putting a more contemporary name on it, but just the idea of like death as either death as like a natural part of life or death as just simply not something to be feared.
Right, okay.
She very much saw death as like death is completely natural. It's nothing to be afraid of.
Gotcha.
Comes for us all. And I wonder if that very open door is why Hull House has so many ghost stories now.
Well, I was waiting to share this story.
Please do.
The Devil Baby story.
Oh,
I
please
don't know
go
if
on.
you've heard of the Devil Baby.
Please tell me of the Devil Baby.
This is the story I tell on the riverboat tours. Jane Addams had her house open to like everyone, immigrants, people who needed daycares, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And the story goes that there was an immigrant family with this awful baby. The baby was just crying all the time, and the father, who was kind of getting sick of having this kid, uh, he was just kind of at his wit's end. And when his wife put up a portrait of Jesus Christ, he said, allegedly, "I would rather raise the devil himself than have that portrait of Jesus on my wall." And as a result, that baby, which already annoyed him so much, its skin started to turn red. Its eyes became like that of a snake. It stood up on its hind legs, which had since become cloven hooves, and it began walking around the house, cursing and plucking the cigar from its father's mouth. And apparently they did their best to fix this baby, but nothing stuck. So they dropped it off one night, apparently, at Hull House. And Jane Addams, being the kind woman, very unsuperstitious woman she is, took a look at the devil baby and took it in. She tried to baptize the thing, but the baptism didn't take. It just hopped out. Didn't work. And so apparently she just locked it up in the attic of Hull House for decades. And it actually apparently got a lot of word of mouth advertisement out for the Hull House. And while Jane Addams denied the existence of the devil baby, we don't know for sure if it really was real. So that's the story I tell. One of us is a scholar, and the other is a riverboat tour guide. So let's take that with a grain of salt.
I will say, story does characterize her well.
Good.
Because apparently, as was described to me, I have a friend who works at Hull House, who was telling me a bunch of these stories of Jane, and talking about how Jane and Mary Rosette Smith, they shared a bed in Hull House, and the way that my friend put it is Jane saw ghosts but did not believe in ghosts. And by which I asked, huh? And I was then informed that, so, Smith would then, wake up, see like a phantasmal figure at the foot of their bed. She would wake up Jane, like, Jane, Jane, Jane. And Jane would wake up and like she would see the phantasmal figure and she would go, oh, all right. And then go back to bed. And in the morning, Mary would say, like, Jane, what, like, did you see that woman last night? Jane was like, yeah, it was probably just one of the residents. Um, and Mary Getstar was like, no, that was a ghost. I could see right through her.
You were in our room.
And Jane was like, probably just seeing things. And so I don't know which one of them I love more in this story, but I love them both.
Even if it was a resident,
Yeah.
you don't want her in your room. That's still cause for concern.
I mean, yeah.
Jane Addams just had a severe case, I think, of um, IDGAF.
You
I'll
know,
censor myself since this is a scholarly context.
indeed, I am afraid that that condition may have been terminal.
A terminal condition of
Yeah.
DGAF.
Mm-hmm. Cannot be bothered.
You know what I have?
What do you have?
It's a terminal condition of TGIF.
TGI.
Thank God it's Friday. Am I right?
Um, well done, sir.
We record this on a Sunday.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm unemployed right now.
It's fun.
It's winter.
Yeah.
Boats aren't running. I
It's
don't have anyone to talk to. So I'm making a podcast.
and you know what? That's what it's all about. But other than being home of ghosts and devil babies, Hull House was also home to a number of things. So this is the
What,
place.
like real things?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So this was set up in the heart of Little Italy. Wasn't just a Little Italy because there were also, if you go into the museum, you can sort of see the sort of ethnic breakdown of the neighborhood, sort of block by block. And like large swaths of it were Italian, but there were also like certain like chunks of blocks that were entirely dominated by Ukrainians, Greeks, Polish, like European Jewish was like the term used. I said like Lithuanians, and Mexican immigrants, Puerto Rican, I guess less immigrants. Where were they at that time?
Puerto Rico was annexed in Spanish American War, which was 1898.
1998. So not immigrants, but they moved. And so it was a very like multi-ethnic neighborhood, even being Little Italy. And Hull House was kind of set up as, we talk about like third places.
Mm-hmm.
You have libraries and coffee shops. Back then, Jane really wanted to set up a third place that was not a tavern.
Sure.
There were a lot of Irish, Italian, Polish immigrants living around there. She wanted to prevent some of the social ills that bubbled up during, back in the old country. So she wanted fewer bars but more places for people to find community.
Sure.
And so she founded Hull House to sort of be that communal gathering space. There were like housing all around it, but Hull House itself was more of a community center.
Gotcha.
So there were classes offered there. There were a bunch of community events. There were like libraries and books, restrooms and washrooms, like connected to various other resources. One of the teachers in these classes was actually Viola Spolin, who is the founder of American Improv.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah, and she's instrumental in the Second City.
Yeah.
Spolin technique.
Yes. Her son, Paul Sills, went on to found the Second City using his mother's teaching.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah. And so American Improv and the whole of the US theater world has Spolin to both thank and curse for your college friends inviting you to their improv shows. Yeah.
I'm not liking Hull House.
But Spolin was hired by Addams to teach what Spolin dubbed theater games, particularly to like young children who had, come to Hull House. Their families were recent immigrants, basically to help teach them social skills.
Mhm.
Like, hi, you're in America now. You probably don't really know what's going on. I'm going to use theater games to teach you some more social confidence and community building.
Cool.
So that's why improv exists. So much nobler foundings than Dropout TV, but I still stand by Dropout.
I like Dropout.
I like Dropout. They're It's what Spolin would have wanted.
Right.
But that came out of Hull House because
So
this gathering place. Um, and so
I actually have a quick question.
yeah,
These two women are kind of contemporaries.
yeah, they
Is there any? Do we have any indication that they met or knew of each other or interacted?
I tried looking this up because it was a bit difficult to find out exactly at what point. And again, I may have just needed to do more digging. I couldn't find anything that directly linked the two. I did hear from my friend though that Adams was
Your
very
friend that works
at Hull
Hull House.
House.
Yeah.
That Adams was in her settlement movement, in part inspired by other settlement houses, but also Chicago's urban mission movements, which was not exclusively Mother Cabrini, but she was a massive figure in that.
Sure.
So, if not Cabrini the woman, Cabrini's work definitely had an influence on Adams as she
Gotcha.
was developing. Even if I don't think the two ever met that I can find.
Yeah, that would make sense. Yeah.
Mm.
If
Let's look at these two places today, Cabrini-Green and Hull House. Fun fact, I have two family members who actually used to work at Cabrini-Green. My mom, so my mom's a social worker,
Yeah.
works with a lot of youth.
the youths.
The youths. Today she works in Englewood, but her old district used to be Cabrini-Green.
Gotcha.
And so she's told me stories of like, again, the elevators never worked, walking up those towers, and occasionally she would walk in on drug deals and just be like, oh, sorry, fellas, wrong place, and just like find somewhere else. This just like pale Slovak Irish woman,
Right.
this winding her way up the towers to the 19th floor. But no, like that's when she started, like in her 20s, she was like working Cabrini-Green with a lot of the youth. And then my uncle, he's a now retired electrician. Um, he works for, or used to work for, I think, like AT&T.
Mhm.
It's one of their guys. So he worked all over the city, but they would also work in Cabrini-Green. And at least the way that he tells it, like they didn't charge for like any work done on the telephone wires back then because they were like, it's Cabrini-Green.
Right.
Like we're not doing work here for money. And so like they would just like do that as like some smidgen of a social good.
Yeah.
So like but he also used to work in Cabrini-Green.
Imagine that.
Yeah,
AT&T doing anything for a social good.
right?
That's the most incredulous part of this story.
I know. I wonder if there's something else there, but my uncle's experience of it was
I hope
just
you're not ratting out your uncle
no.
for stealing profits.
No one knows who my uncle is.
That's true.
I could even tell you his name, and every Greek man in my family has like some version of the same name, so you don't even know who I'm talking about.
Euros Apollonios.
Exactly.
Which one?
The junior, senior, the third, fourth. But Cabrini-Green today, all those high rises that made it so infamous, those are all torn down. It's quite valuable land considering that it's river north, but um, a lot of that's actually being developed into the now reformed CHA, into like all like mixed income housing. So you're not concentrating all the poverty in one place and segregating them from everyone else.
Right.
So it's becoming a mixed income neighborhood, funded by the CHA, but available to all Chicagoans, make it more like affordable price
Right.
kind of thing. So like that's a positive development coming to the neighborhood, which is kind of sat without much attention ever since turn of the 2000s.
Yeah, I mean, I know those. That's right by the old Marshall Fields headquarters.
Yeah.
And that area is seeing a lot of development today.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's like 2 blocks from
Yeah.
the new casino, Bally's Casino.
No,
That's going in.
exactly.
In the old Freedom Center.
Mm-hmm. And it's like just up from Merchandise Mart or
Yeah.
the Mart. Yeah.
Or the Mart. Yes.
Yeah, Merchandise Mart.
Merchandise. Well, let's be real.
Yeah. But it's getting a lot more development there, in what's looking like a positive way. And one of the churches that used to exist in Cabrini-Green, the Strangers Home Missionary Baptist Church. There's a local effort amongst like former and still current residents of the row homes to turn that church, which is hasn't really been operating in years, into the Cabrini Art House. It's like a community art center for the people of Cabrini-Green. And it's like, again, another sort of social gathering place, making Cabrini and Addams quite proud, I would say.
Yeah.
As for Hull House in Little Italy, I don't know if you've heard the story of what's happened to Chicago's Little Italy.
Not really, no.
So Little Italy, it still exists today. Taylor Street on the near west side is kind of its main artery, going through the campus of like UIC and into the
Yeah.
medical district.
Okay.
Um, it and its side streets used to be a lot more of Little Italy, and suffered a couple of blows by, I believe, the senior Mayor Daley, who plopped both the Eisenhower and the UIC campus on top of most of Little Italy.
Right.
Some say that it was because he was trying to fight the political organizing power of the Italians. I think he was Southside Irish, Mayor Daley.
Yeah, he's from Bridgeport.
Yeah, and so I think and so there's some people say it was to spite the Italians for not supporting him enough. Others say that it was, generally trying to buck the trends of the sort of white flight suburbanization during that era,
Right.
and like try to keep more
Early 70s.
connections into the city.
Yeah.
With like big university, big like, suburban to urban connection on the expressway.
Right.
People have different takes. You're free to choose whatever you want to believe, but so Hull House today still exists. It is sort of operated as a free museum, either by or just on the campus of UIC.
Oh.
So it's all still intact.
That's
Still
where all the Mies van der Rohe buildings are, right?
that and IIT.
IIT, right?
Yeah,
Right.
Illinois Institute of Technology. That's near Bronzeville. But so a lot of Little Italy has kind of become University Village to the point where they're sort of like two parts of one neighborhood, I'd say.
Sure.
College Town, UIC, and Taylor Street and its capillaries, Little Italy. My family's favorite restaurant is in Little Italy, though, Pompeii.
Pompeii.
Yeah.
Shouts out to Pompeii.
Oh yeah, right on Taylor Street. You're the best. But with all that, Hull House is still, again, it's a museum. It's also a, you know, something of a community and art center still. They still have a bunch of free events. They still do a bunch of social gathering stuff. A lot of activist groups will like hold events there. And they're through the grapevine, I've heard that they're potentially trying to get that old theater program that's existed sporadically over the years, starting with Spolin, sort of back into a more regular thing again. Which I'm like, that would be sick. So Cabrini-Green, Hull House, both places with ties to like very like social reform minded religious women who did their best to help be amongst and serve the people who were most neglected by everyone else in society in neighborhoods that have taken a beating over the years. But things are looking up, and I hope that that trend continues.
America's first saint
Mm-hmm.
hails Chicago as home,
Mm-hmm.
and then Jane Addams. I mean, what an influencer.
Oh yeah.
Before influencing.
Mm-hmm.
So even though this isn't like a traditional Chicago Transcendence Authority religious overview, I feel like
Right.
this is much more boots on the ground religion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like how religion is manifested into actually having an impact on their
Right.
city.
Like how do people live it out, and how does the way they live it out affect their community?
Right. And I think that these two women are like really emblematic of like the Chicago work ethic and
Mm-hmm.
just the way that historically and today like Chicagoans deal with stuff. Like the way that to this day the people interacting with Cabrini-Green and interacting with the Hull House are they're still attempting to complete the mission
Mm-hmm.
that it started with. I think that's really cool.
Yeah. And no, that's beautiful. I couldn't put it any better.
I stole that outro from you.
You did, but
Really?
I'll forgive you
I
for it.
snuck in. I've been listening. I've been writing that.
Mm-hmm.
I have a notepad right here.
Oh my
I've been
gosh.
writing it. I haven't been listening to a single thing you said, so I could write that beautiful outro.
Oh my gosh, this is huge yellow legal pad
know,
full of scribbles. It's
I've really been working on it.
is that a hangman? Have you been listening to anything?
No, I have
Oh
not.
man.
Who are you?
Oh, hi, pleasure to meet you, Ben.
I'm Andy.
And this has been the Chicago Transcendence Authority.
Seamless.
Beautiful. This is a Blue Line train to Forest Park. UIC Halstead is next. Doors open on the left at UIC Halstead.